I think we good. Cool. Right, guys, welcome back to another episode. No, we're not going to do that. Okay, getting back into the topic. Peach, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Sweet, man. So last week we spoke about free will. We did the introduction to it, the topic, why the topic is so important, and just defining what free will is exactly. So I'm going to put a card up here. Go check that out. And that was the lead into the actual discussion of whether it exists or not. So building onto that which we had last week, with Peach back on the show now, let's get back into that topic. Right, so Peach, I'm going to let you start the discussion and present your arguments as to why you think that free will does exist.
Right. So if the listeners will recall, at the end of last week's discussion, we kind of brought up this comparison of a criminal and how we deem that person to be bad, regardless of whether we know what their circumstances are. We kind of discussed how that their attitude or their behavior could be seen as just a byproduct of the circumstances that they were brought up in or raised in, or that they were surrounded by. I mean, without a family structure, without moral support, without any of these things that we take for granted in a very fortunate society, that person will very likely lead a life of crime, because that's the only pleasure that they would do. In the same vein, we spoke a little bit about Elon Musk and how he has achieved so much. He's achieved so much just through what he has contributed towards society. And I think in some sense, they're very similar. Like, Elon Musk has received what he has received because of his contributions towards society. And I mean, this is quite a maybe you could say a little bit of a vague example. Nonetheless, I think it still stands that those who attribute a lot get a lot. And if you had to take it down to to a free will aspect, onto a smaller set of finer notes, like Elon Musk is a grand example, because he's like, it's very easy to attribute to him like all these things that he's done, and to kind of see how he's achieved these things, like through the steps and processes. I think I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but I just wanted to bring to the foreground of people's imaginations or insights in this discussion that, like, the smallest things that you can do, if they align with the goals that you want to achieve, will help you achieve those goals. In Elon Musk's case, he has set up his life in such a manner that, like, everything that he does on a day is working towards a higher goal. And therefore, he can achieve these things and reap the benefits of his achievements. Mm-hmm. And we as a society want that. We want him to achieve more, because he is by far an outstanding citizen. He goes further and beyond almost any citizen. I mean, like, you could say 99% of citizens in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, because he's so far ahead of everyone else, I would say it's almost fair that he gets what he gets. Mm-hmm. You can rebuttal me on that if you'd like to.
Yeah. So I don't want to drift too far off topic with this, because I feel like this is reaching into a different side of it, which is a different discussion. Whether it's more a case of whether people get what they deserve, and in our world, in our society, in the way that it's built up, is if you are doing good and you're contributing to society, that your goals are set up right and you're working in the right way, that you will reap the benefits of that. And if you're doing the contrary, where you a detriment to society, and you have a bad state of mind, or you are actually in a sense an evil in our society, that you will reap the repercussions of that, and that it'll be to your own detriment, and that your life will be worse off because of that. So without getting into it, my answer to that would be that it's exactly the contrary of that. My personal belief or conviction is that our society rewards you for being bad. Because it's a capitalist society, the more you screw over other people, the more you get rewarded for it. Elon Musk being an exception, but we don't know how far he is actually an exception. So there's varying levels to this. So there might be cases where you do get rewarded, and it's not very clear cut. But as a whole, I would say a capitalist society rewards greediness and bad versus and does the opposite. It punishes you for being giving and good and caring towards other people. But side topic. So let's put a pin on that. And actually, it's fine to have that as an introduction to this topic. But let's actually get into the nitty gritty of whether or not you are actually in control of your own. If you are a baddie, if you are an evil in the world, and you are stuffing up our world and you're hurting people, is it of your own doing? 100% actually of your own doing. And if you're an Elon Musk, is it really of your own doing?
I see. Yeah. Definitely sidetracking a little bit off topic and going into a capitalist debate there, but let's sidetrack exactly. That one for now. Okay, so I would just like to clarify for all listeners now that Steph and I are literally just two humans discussing an interesting conversation, and we want to kind of encourage that this conversation be taken out of the space and into the daily life so that people can consider it more. We're not necessarily saying that we are the authorities on this matter and that we are the truth on the matter, like we're just sharing ideas. I personally have to believe, I firmly want to believe that free will does manifest itself. Like your decision making on the day-to-day will not only impact your life, but the life of the people around you. And like I mentioned in the previous video, the life of the global community. And that can be a little intimidating. And I think that might be one of the reasons why people would want to believe that free will is not the predominant view, or is not what governs our decision making, that it's more of a deterministic. I don't know if deterministic is necessarily the opposite of free will, but for me it kind of seems that way, that everything is just preordained, that you're an equation of variables, and regardless of what variables are in that equation, the answer will be like, you're going to get an answer. That also being said, I think it's like a living equation. It's an equation that is constantly changing, but that it doesn't mean that the equation itself like can just be a spontaneous answer that's outside of the realm of that equation, if that makes sense. So you'll have your variables in that equation that determine the answer, but you can still adjust those dials based on your current standings and your current like mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your relationship with people. These are all variables that can go into the equation of what determines whether or not your actions will have certain implications. I don't want to go too far because I'd love for you to chip in. No,
I'd like to build on to that. So let me just gather my thoughts quick. Okay. All right. So I'd like to build on to that. So when it comes down to right now, in this very moment, is it in my control to change my future? Or not to change my future, but to direct my future? And I would say, despite the fact that our existence is deterministic, despite the fact that my choice that I'm going to make now is already preordained, that it's part of the equation, that doesn't change the fact that in this very moment I have the power to steer it, if that makes sense. So the we spoke about personal responsibility in the last video. So now I want to say that despite the fact that we don't have free will, and that despite the fact that my actions are going to be what my actions are, right now in this very moment, I do actually have the power to steer what direction my life goes into, which means I do have that personal responsibility to steer it in the right direction. But now what we need to realize, now this is where it's important. So there's the two sides to it. There's our personal responsibility, and where we need to make the best possible decisions, where we need to set the right goals, where we need to try and contribute as much to society, because it is in our power. But what we also need to realize is that you don't know what you don't know, and you aren't aware of what you aren't aware of, and it's not your fault, and it's not anyone's fault. It's not anyone else's fault.
Okay.
And it's not anyone's fault that anyone is who they are, and it's not anyone's fault that they are good. So Elon Musk, as great as what he is, and as much as he is a contribution to our society, and as much as I admire the man, it's not of his own doing that he is Elon Musk. He was just born that way. And we need to understand that, and understand that people that removes that okay, now I'm drifting off topic here if I talk about the consequences of it. But I think let me pass the baton over to you again from what I've said now.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify your view a little bit, if I understand it correctly. So what you're trying to say is that there is an equation that will determine your action, and that equation is set. Yeah. But within that equation, you have some control of how you want the result to come out.
Okay, let me clarify that. So it's if you think about it like algebra, you start with the first equation, and now you're breaking it down, and now you're on the second step of the equation, and then you're breaking it down, and you're working towards x. So you want to find out what x is. So now we're running through those equations, and you're now on this step, and where it's going to end up, x is already there. It is already there. The answer is already what it's going to be, but we are at this step right now. And whatever the decisions that you're going to make on this step, besides the fact that this is why I said the logic is so fine. It's so hidden. You have control right now. Your decision has an impact on the future, but whatever decision you're going to make right now is already there. And now what's going to change your decision is me saying something to you, which will lead you on a different path. But I was already always going to say that to you. It was already always part of the equation.
I see.
So the outcome is inevitable. The outcome will always be what it already is. But at the same time, you have that personal responsibility right now. Even though you were already always going to make that decision, you still need to make the best possible decision.
I see.
Do you see how I don't know how to explain that better? It's such a fine line.
Yeah, but it's very difficult to put it into terminology and to put into words.
Yeah.
So like what I'm hearing from you is like a variance of like a free will deterministic view. Like there is this like, how I also see it is like, if you are like this little node and you've got all these different lines of information, or like this could be your past events coming to you, and then the future events coming out of you.
Exactly.
I think what you want to kind of show is that there's all this coming in and then one line coming out.
Yeah. Well, it is always just one. If we had to put it in terms of a timeline. So a lot of people see time as being these points of decisions. Now, and that every decision a person makes splits the timeline into the decision they could have made and the decision that they made, and then leading to another decision, which then splits into different timelines. Now, what I would say is that that it is only one direction. It's got all your decisions that are directing the path, but it's along one timeline. It was the decision that each decision was already, it is a consequence of the other. Let me put it in more of a, I'll use an example from physics, how physics works. So in when it comes to physics, it's very clear. When we think about our own mind, it gets confusing. But when it comes to physics, it's very clear. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to take ourselves as a physical example. If I hear a gunshot, so a gun fires, it goes off, and what happens is you have a reaction of air atoms hitting each other. So that the atoms don't move through the air, so you get a sound wave, but a wave isn't actually the atoms traveling towards you. It's just they're knocking onto each other.
The energy. Yeah, it's the energy traveling through the atoms.
So knock onto each other, onto each other until it hits your eardrum, and your eardrum vibrates, which then hits your, I think it's a cerebrum or something like that. I forgot the name of it. It's your inner ear. And then that vibrates the hairs in your inner ear, which then sends electrical signals into your brain, into the temporal cortex of your brain. And then inside the temporal cortex of your brain, you have specific neurons that fire depending on the frequency. So even depending on what frequency those neurons fire, and the firing of those neurons triggers the firing of other neurons in the other parts of your brain, in your frontal cortex, which then helps you to, so your temporal cortex now interprets what the sound is. Your frontal cortex makes sense of what that sound is and how you should react to it, sending it to your motor cortex, which then also is just a knock-on reaction if you look at it in a physical sense. And then your motor cortex sends those electrical impulses to your, what do you call it? Your nervous system, to your nervous system. Your nervous system stimulating your muscles, causing you to react, to move. So, and now, despite the fact that in your frontal cortex you are making decisions, you're processing all this information, you're taking it all in, and when you break it down to the very basic things, all it is a knock-on of neuron hitting neuron, the way it was always going to hit. But the big exception is that I can still make a decision right now. It's like a contradiction, but it's not.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest here and say I think you're advocating for free will, but you want it to be deterministic. Like that's what I'm getting.
Okay, in that case, I'm not explaining it well enough because the or it depends how you define free will then, because it's it's a case of you were always going to make that decision, and you can't blame anyone for the decision that they were always going to make.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit to where you brought up the case of the timeline and how your decision will branch off into different timelines. Like if you think of like multiverse theory or whatever, like every instance of the universe will result in a different universe.
Exactly.
That's also very, you could say that's under this topic a little bit if you really wanted to include that in here. However, I would go as far as to say, I would like to say something like, I don't think the future is predictable to a degree. The weird thing is where we bring consciousness into the equation, because consciousness seems to be the unpredictable thing. Like in physics, we can predict how atoms will move and react with one another if we have sufficient information. But the consciousness brings in this level of uncertainty that we physically cannot determine. Like how do you, okay, do you want to chip in here?
Yeah. So now we're really getting to the nitty-gritty of the topic. So the consciousness thing. So a lot of people perceive it as being completely unpredictable. I would argue in the first place that human behavior is predictable. And if you know enough about psychology, you can pretty much determine more or less how the majority, if you had a group selection and you do an experiment with them, you can more or less predict how they would react, because they they react based on the same thoughts and beliefs and leading towards the same outcomes. And the only reason why consciousness isn't 100% predictable all the time is because we don't know all the factors. So it's like a physics equation. You would be able to determine how fast a city, not a Golf, a Golf 6 GTI would be traveling on the highway at 3,000 RPMs. You have enough. Well, let's say you don't take in the air resistance factor, you don't take in friction on the tires, and you don't consider those factors. You would more or less be able to work out how fast the car would be going on the highway at 3,000 RPMs, but you wouldn't be able to determine it exactly because you don't know enough information. But now if we bring in the air resistance and how the car is built and how that flows through the air and the friction of the tires, and we factor that in, then the equation becomes a lot more accurate and the prediction becomes more accurate. I see, so now consciousness, we have to remember that the brain is immensely complex. We have to take into consideration how complex the brain is. There's 100 billion neurons that we have in our brain, and each neuron has about 1,000 connections. So if I had to, yeah, but basically, if I had to stimulate just one neuron, and the rest of the brain is hypothetically brain dead, but it's not dead. But say you stimulated one neuron, it would lead to the outcome of that is it could be anything of a trillion different varieties.
Yeah.
But now you don't have one neuron firing. You've got sensors that are reading in billions of little bits of information all the time, and that's why the outcome is so unpredictable, because there's just way too many possibilities. But hypothetically, if you had a computer where you could read in all the information, you'd be able to predict the future, not only human behavior, but what that would entail is you would have to have all the information about absolutely everything in the universe that's happening, because everything has a knock-on effect on everything else.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to bring up next, is that, like, so what you're kind of advocating for is that if we had enough information, or if we had all the sufficient information of everything that was going into our equation of free will, that we would be able to predict to the T the next outcome.
Exactly.
From a scientific standpoint, I would have to agree with you on that, because everything in science kinds of works off models. Like if we have the appropriate model with the appropriate amount of information, we can predict the future. The thing about that is, though, it's impossible. We cannot physically have, we can't have all the information. We physically cannot have information. So now we're kind of delving into a realm where we think we know what could potentially happen, because we have a model that says if we have everything, we can predict. But we don't know. Fill in.
Just remember that it's not about the conversation isn't about being able to predict the outcome or predict human action. The conversation is just about the fact that it is predictable, not that it's physically that we are physically capable of predicting it, but that I suppose
it will be determinable.
The right word for it is determinable, which is why it's called the determinism, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I like the way you have put this information together. I just like there's so much, there's too much to contemplate. I still firmly believe, and I might be wrong about this, that that we can't have enough information, and because we can't have enough information, we can't determine. And therefore, I think it's incorrect to say that if we had enough information that we can determine. Does that make sense?
No, I hear what you're saying.
Okay, so then on top of that, like I I like that physics has this ability to predict the future, and like with a deterministic viewpoint, you can kind of tell what will happen, and that's kind of what we are trying to do here with this. Like, if you don't have free will, then everything you do is predictable.
Yeah. But it's not about somebody else or a person or a human being able to predict it.
I'm not trying to make it. I'm not trying to make it that way. I'm just like,
it is a case of that it's inevitable. The outcome of your action is inevitable.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't like that. Like I just straight up don't like that. That's not for me. There's stuff in physics as well, like the law of entropy. Things tend towards chaos. Like a system will always tend towards chaos. That's the law of entropy. And humans are technically actually the only things that try to make order. Like, it's kind of weird. Maybe I'm wrong in that statement, and listeners, please chip in on this if I am wrong, because I'd like to develop more conversation on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, human society is literally trying to take order. I mean, to take chaos and make order out of it. That's what we're trying to do. The universe as on a whole is tending towards chaos, and that chaos will inevitably happen because like, we're too small and insignificant, I feel, that on the long run that we could actually make a change of it. I don't know, maybe we are. If you guys have ever heard of the Fermi paradox, also go check that out. That's terrific.
I think that paradox, yeah. Yeah. Just to what you said about entropy. So it's a side topic that I would like to discuss at some point with somebody. But and I'm going against the science community here, but I would argue that I know what the science community says. It says that entropy is true and that the world is that the universe is leading towards entropy. I would say that isn't necessarily the case. I don't think that it's necessarily the case. If you take, for example, if you make coffee and you leave it standing out, entropy will the heat from that coffee will diffuse and leave the cup, and that is entropy. But then I come in and I take the mug and I put it in the microwave and I heat it up again. So what is that? And how is that not
chaos and making order of it?
Yeah. So how is that not the reverse of entropy? So I think scientists say in the closed system that it will always lead to entropy, but there is no closed system. There's the whole universe, and then on the one side of the universe you have everything leading to entropy, but on the other side of the universe, or not even on this other side of the universe, within the universe you have other reactions or other things happening, leading towards the opposite of entropy. And just because now it's maybe what you would call a conscious being doing it, or something else, you want to say that it's not entropy. I don't know, but that is something I would like to discuss with somebody at some point. So on a different video. Getting back to topic, with debates, what's always the case, and I really believe this is you'll have a lot to say, I'll have a lot to say. And then at the end of it, you need to think about it first. And I know from experience that what happens is a week down the line or 2 weeks down the line, you think about it, and then you start thinking about things that you could have said or should have said, or you start realizing, you always realize things afterwards and not in the moment. So we'll leave it open-ended over there. I'll give you a chance to say your last few thoughts, Peach.
I want to add like 2 more minutes of discussion to this, if possible.
Definitely. But my point being is that we can definitely revisit this topic and take it up again once you've processed everything that's been said. Okay, so Peter's 2 minutes turned out to be a 20-minute video. So to be continued. I decided to put that in a separate video. I didn't want to release it next week because we don't want 3 weeks of the same subject. I think it's a bit excessive. So that is releasing today as well. You can check out the card over here and you guys can go check that out. It's still very interesting, it's very relative. He made quite a few valid points, and the conversation got quite intense. So I think it's worth a watch. I just didn't want to leave it inside this video because it would make this one way too long. So up to you if you want to go see that, check that out. Otherwise, thank you for joining me on this week's episode. I hope we gave you some valid thoughts to think about. And yeah, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, leave a comment in the comment section below of the topic that you would like to talk about, followed by a hashtag change the mentality. Leave us your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thanks guys, thanks for watching. Consider everything. The possibility of winning a lottery is way more, like way higher than you being correct about absolutely everything that you think you're correct about.
Oh yeah.
Which means you are wrong about something at least. So just be prepared to be wrong about anything in that case.
I feel like I'm wrong about everything in general. So I just try to present my information in a logical argument that makes it sound somewhat true, so people will believe me. But I'm talking absolute A-grade bullshit.
I have no control over my actions.